Yeah.
Ever catch yourself, like, I don't know, staring at your bank account and you just think like, man, what if I could just hit reset on this whole system?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
the whole financial system, it feels very,
Yeah.
rigged sometimes.
It's a question people have been asking for centuries,
Right,
right?
right.
But it feels more relevant now than ever with the rise of Bitcoin.
Definitely. And, that's kind of what we're diving into today. You sent over this article, and it's making some pretty bold claims,
Yeah.
basically saying Bitcoin has the potential to, like, upend the whole thing.
Yeah, it really does. It gets into some really interesting ideas.
It does.
Especially this whole concept that centralized institutions are, maybe not serving us as well as we think.
Right.
Like, is it really a fair game if you're not in control of the rules? You know?
Right. And this article even goes so far as to call some of these policies we take for granted, like, universal basic income.
Yeah, taxation.
Taxation. They call it institutionalized theft,
Mm.
which feels a little dramatic maybe, but
It's provocative.
it's provocative.
But I think the article is really trying to challenge us to think differently. When you really look at it, who benefits from the current setup?
So unpack this whole institutionalized theft thing for me.
Sure. So a core argument of Bitcoin proponents is that inflation, which is controlled by governments, is basically a hidden tax.
So instead of like taking it directly,
Exactly.
they're just kind of like,
They're devaluing what's already in your pocket.
Yeah.
And the article points to 1971 when the U.S. left the gold standard. Before that, there was a limit on how much money could be printed because it was tied to a physical asset, right?
Mhm.
But after that, it was like opening the floodgates for governments to print at will.
and didn't we see like crazy inflation back then?
Oh, absolutely.
Like in the 70s?
It was a recipe for disaster for anyone trying to save their money.
Yeah.
Because if your money is constantly losing value,
Right.
you're being robbed.
Yeah, it's like it's silently like siphoning out of your account or something.
It's insidious.
Yeah.
And it often hits the poorest the hardest,
Right.
while enriching those who are already at the top.
So is Bitcoin like our way to kind of like slip out the back door of the casino and then set up our own game,
I like that analogy. Yeah, I mean, that's the hope, right? That's the utopian vision that a lot of Bitcoin evangelists put forward.
Right.
And it's interesting because this article, like you said, it really positions Bitcoin as a way to escape a system that's, kind of rigged.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about opting out of inflation, though, right? It's about taking back control. This whole idea of sovereign money.
Right. Which
Which
is
is a really powerful concept.
This is a little, I don't know, it's a little like
It sounds very grand.
pretty grand. Yeah. So break that down a little bit.
So, like, in a practical sense, imagine a world where your savings can't be messed with by a government just deciding to print more money.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole thing with Bitcoin's fixed supply. It's
Right.
like, we know there's only going to be 21 million coins, ever.
So that's what makes it inflation-proof, essentially.
Essentially, yeah. They can't just print more. And because it's decentralized, it's really hard to censor or seize.
So even if, like, the government didn't like what I was doing with my Bitcoin, they couldn't, like, freeze my assets.
Yeah. Theoretically, no. Which
Yeah.
is,
Interesting.
that's the appeal.
Yeah.
You control your own money.
Right, and the article talked about that a little bit. Like, it gave those examples of, countries where there's hyperinflation
Right.
and, like, they're using it as a way to,
To actually function.
to function. Yeah.
Yeah, and to escape those really difficult situations.
It's interesting because it's like this thing that was designed in the digital world, but it seems to be having a very real impact on, in the real world.
It's bridging the gap.
It is. Although I will say, a lot of these use cases, I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense for them. But I'm like, is this relevant to, like, the average person?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a question that I think a lot of people are asking, right?
Yes.
Like, what does this actually mean for me? And, while the technology is still being developed and we see, obviously, there's price volatility and things like that, it represents something much bigger.
Mm.
It's like a fundamental shift in how we think about money and power.
So it's almost like Bitcoin is, like, the poster child for this much bigger thing that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, it's not really about Bitcoin. It's about, like, questioning the whole,
whole system.
Exact-
System.
And I think this article does a really good job of getting to that.
It does. Like, I'm not saying Bitcoin is perfect,
Right.
It's not going to solve everything,
Right.
but it's a really interesting experiment.
It is.
And I think it challenges us to at least consider, like, what if there's a different way to do
Right.
this?
What if we could make a financial system that's like, more transparent and like, you know, less controlled by the same, you
A
know,
select few. Yeah,
people?
for sure.
It's like we've been handed like this whole new set of tools and we're like, well, what are we going to build now?
Right, and that's what I find so fascinating about it.
Yeah.
It's not just about, like, the tech stuff, right?
Right.
It's about, like, our values.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of world do we want, you know?
It's funny because like we started out talking about, somebody staring at their bank account being like, man, wouldn't it be great to just like hit reset on this?
Yeah.
But it's like, maybe that's not like a crazy daydream.
It might be possible.
Like
Yeah.
maybe it has possible.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a pretty good place to wrap things up, I think.
I think so. Yeah. It's a lot to think about.
It is.
But it's an exciting time to be paying attention, I think.
It is. And for our listeners who, like me, are like, yeah, their heads are probably spinning a little bit.
Yeah.
Just remember, keep asking those questions
Hmm.
and, keep an open mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the future might look a lot different than what we're thinking.
Yeah.